Greetings of the day to all the learners of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University. We shall be dealing today with the MBA program, wherein course 5 managerial communication will be dealt in. Under this, your unit 1 is communication, wherein we would be talking about the meaning and the process of communication. As on today, we shall discuss the first topic under this particular unit, which is to do with verbal and non-verbal communication. Before we proceed actually to verbal and non-verbal communication, let us first discuss what is the meaning of communication, and let us see some of the definitions which are there through the literature of managerial communication. Now, basically, to understand, communication means art of transmitting information, ideas and attitudes from one person to another, wherein some kind of a meaningful interaction actually occurs between humans. So, in communication, what basically happens is we are trying to exchange our thoughts, our ideas, our information with other people who are there around us. Now, in the context of a company, if you see, communication basically happens between superiors and subordinates. It happens between workers in an organization, that is one subordinate with another, and it happens between the employees and the management of the company. Basically, what happens there is they are trying to share knowledge, they are trying to share information with all the members who are present in the organization. So, what happens here in communication is there is a mutual understanding, there is better coordination, and it kinds of builds confidence among people when they are trying to exchange their thoughts and ideas with one another. Now, that is basic understanding of what is communication. Currently, what happens with your video lessons which are being recorded is also communication, where the facilitators are actually communicating with you in terms of the content of your courses and trying to help you understand the various concepts which are there. Now, if you see the history about from where did the word communication come and all, basically it is derived from the Latin word communis, which means common, wherein we try to understand that a person who is trying to communicate is trying to establish a common ground of understanding. You are trying to tell something to the other person listens, and the two people who are involved are trying to understand one another when they communicate. So, that the derivation of the word is from communis, which means common or a common ground of understanding which is there. Now, technically, if you happen to see what this term means, there are various definitions which are being given. One definition is being given by Louis Allen, who says that it is nothing but sum of all the things one person does when he wants to create an understanding in the mind of another person, a systematic and a continuous process of telling, listening and understanding. So, you try to tell, the other person is listening, and both the people who are in the conversation are trying to understand one another. Now, in the words of Coons O'Donnell, communication is nothing but transfer of information from one person to another person, or whether it is to gain confidence or not to gain confidence as such. In the words of Robert Anderson says that communication is nothing but a process whereby you are trying to understand thoughts, opinions, information either through speech, either through writing, or either through various signs which are there. So, opinions, informations which are shared through speaking, through writing or through signages, these are all nothing but communication. Now, if you happen to see what all are the characteristics from these definitions which are there, we see that communication is nothing but a process whereby two parties are involved, where mutual understanding between the parties is there. And if you talk about communication inside a firm or inside an organization, it is an all pervasive function, which means that all the departments, all the people who belong to different functions in a company, they all communicate with one another, and it's a continuous process where it does not end. The end to communication would actually mean end to the world. So, therefore, we say that it's an ongoing process. All activities are based based on communication only, and the flow of communication is actually circular, where you see one person communicates with the second communicates with third and fourth, and thereby the people communicate with one another, which is a circular one as such. And basically, why do we communicate? Because we want some kind of a change in the behavior of another person. We want to influence the other person, maybe the thoughts of the other person, opinions of another person, behavior or a belief system, value system. For example, when you talk about parents who are actually communicating with their children about do's and don'ts, moral values and ethics, we are trying to tell them, we are trying to help them understand what they are supposed to be doing and not supposed to be doing. So when we communicate, we are trying to change their behavior, we are trying to influence the way they live. Likewise, in organizations also, when employees join a company, the employer or the supervisor communicates with him about code of conduct to tell the employee what they are supposed to be doing, that is what they ought to do and what they are not to do. So that way you are trying to influence the behavior of individuals as such. And it is expression of thoughts, emotions from one person to another person, either through words or either through action. Even without speaking, even through non-verbal communication also, we end up communicating a lot to the other person through our words which are there and through actions which we actually depict. And basically, it's a social and emotional process where, people are involved, and there are a lot of emotions which flow in the entire process of communication. Now, basic understanding of this course, that is lesson 1, is about verbal and non-verbal, but without this fundamental knowledge about what is communication, we wouldn't be able to proceed. That's why first we would concentrate on this fundamentals of communication and then actually proceed to the main topic of this particular lesson, which is verbal and non-verbal. So if you see what is communication process, basically we are talking about how many people are involved in that entire process. You would have 8 elements which are there in the entire process of communication. First, you would have the sender. So somebody who is actually from where the message actually originates. So somebody who is actually sending that message, and there is a need which that particular person is feeling, so that he conveys that information to the other person. So the entire purpose of communicating some information to one or the other person originates from the sender as such. And this particular sender is actually sending the message by encoding it. There is some kind of a codes through which the message is being sent. The code basically is in terms of language, or is in terms of gestures or expressions or formation of sentences, whatever it could be. There is some kind of a coding which is being done, and the communicator is transmitting in the form of verbal words, physical expressions or gestures, which is basically called as encoding, which we say. Now, that encoding is done to a message. Message is actually output of this entire process of communication, and it must be unambiguously understood by the receiver. That means there should not be any confusion. What is it that the sender is wanting to tell? That should be understood by the receiver in the same sense. Then only you would say that the message or the communication is successful. And then that message is transmitted through a channel. There is some kind of a channel, either it could be in the form of printed pages which are there, or face-to-face communication, or there is a telephone through which we are communicating, or a computer system where we are sending an email, or doing social media communication, or there's some kind of a channel which is being involved, and that proper choice of channel is also very essential when you are communicating with the other person who was there. For example, in organizations, what happens is you do not want internal communication to go outside the company. So you would basically have something called as intranet. Within the company, you would have an email system, or you would have the medias which are there within the organization, intranet, through which employees are communicating with one another. Now, from the receiver side, when he is getting the message, he also has to decode, because a sender has encoded it in the form of some codes. So that code, the finding meaning of that particular code rests with the receiver. So the receiver will have to interpret the message, which is basic understanding of that particular message. And receiver can be either one person, or it can be a group of people, or it can be the world at large to whom you are sending the message as such, who has to receive, decode the message without any kind of a distortion. And the whole process of communication rests on an element called feedback, where there should be a reaction from the receiver. Feedback will enable the sender to know whether the message is received and interpreted correctly or not. So that is what is the feedback. And in this whole process, what happens, there is also noise, which means disturbance. When the sender is sending message and the receiver is receiving, decoding, trying to understand, there might be some kind of a disturbance in any stage of communication. That disturbance actually hinders proper communication. It distorts the message which can be sent. For example, in a classroom, when a teacher is communicating, if the students are making a lot of noise, or in a company when the manager is communicating and then there is an outrage from the side of an employee, or there is a telephone which is ringing and you are communicating, all these are all disturbances and noises which are there, which are actually physical disturbances, but sometimes disturbances can also be in the mind of the person, which we will talk about when we actually come to the lesson barriers to communication. As of now, you have to understand that there is some kind of a disturbance which can be there in this entire process. So this is the fundamental understanding of this particular lesson. Now we actually come to the main content of this lesson, which talks about verbal and non-verbal communication. Now when I am trying to communicate currently, I am trying to communicate through words spoken, and all the learners are actually listening. This process is called as verbal communication. So speaking plus listening is verbal communication. Let us first discuss speaking. Now in speaking, what happens is, as a person, when I am speaking, I should know two things: what to speak and how to speak. These two are very essential for a speaker when he is trying to communicate to the world at large. We see some of the great orators in the world history. You talk about, Abraham Lincoln, or you talk about great leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, or you talk about current leaders like Barack Obama, or anybody else whom you feel that are good communicators. Even in organizations, we see Narayan Murthy of Infosys, or you talk about Azim Premji of Wipro, or you talk about Satya Nadella of software. All these people are all good communicators with the employees of their company, because they know what they are speaking and they know how to speak. So first let us concentrate on what to speak. Here 3 steps will be involved in what you are trying to speak. First step is brainstorm, second step is how you are presenting, and third step is presentation itself. So brainstorming, format of presentation, and the presentation itself. Let us come to step 1, brainstorming. Now brainstorming as an individual, see, when I am speaking now on verbal and non-verbal communication, I am actually brainstorming, where I am trying, it's a process where I am trying to get all my ideas at one place. So whatever could be the topic on which you are speaking, or whatever could be the content, first the speaker will have to get all his ideas out on the paper. Here the basic idea is to put down all or most of your ideas on the paper, because this has 2 advantages. One is unrestricted flow of thought. Whatever is your thought process, whatever is there in your mind, all that can come immediately when you have brainstormed. You don't have to search for words or search for thoughts when brainstorming has already happened. This is one. Second thing is, as a speaker, you can make a comparative evaluation of all your ideas, and you can rank your ideas. What will I tell first? What will I tell later? What will I tell when I conclude? All these things you can do a proper evaluation when you have brainstormed. So currently when I am speaking on this topic, verbal communication, I have actually brainstormed on all the ideas which I actually have on this particular topic, whereby I am trying to put my thoughts across to all the learners of this particular course. This is first step. Second step is the format. How am I presenting? See, most of the time, as learners, even as teachers, when we are teaching, there is one, as human being, average human being which we are, we have this tendency of forgetfulness, right? Most of us forget when we are speaking. This forgetfulness is basically due to nervousness, and sometimes it is reverse also. People forget because they are nervous, or they get nervous because they are forgotten. So it can be either ways which is there. So forgetting because of nervousness, or getting nervous because you have forgotten something. Now, not to do that, you can actually have a presentation format where you can follow either of the 2 things. One is called as an IBC method: introduction, body, conclusion. Know what you are speaking in the first, that is, how do you introduce the topic, what is the main content of what you are speaking, and then how do you go about concluding that particular content. So, IBC, introduction, body and conclusion. Or you can go for the second format, which is called WHPI, where you talk about what you are speaking, how you are speaking, proving it, and then concluding it, so that people who are listening are able to interpret. So, what, how, prove it, and then conclude it. Then you also talk about the time sequence, that is, whatever you speak, you can actually take back reference from the past, you can actually give its relevance in the present, and then project towards the future. Say for example, when I am talking about a topic called unemployment, or I am debating about employment schemes of the government, then I can talk about, what has been the unemployment or the employment rates for past 10 years, 5 years, what is the current status, and what kind of schemes will project or take employment to a higher level in India. So, that way what am I doing in my presentation? I am trying to refer to the past, bring the relevance in the present, and then take the conversation into the future. So, that way you can have your presentation format: IBC method, introduction, body, conclusion; WHPI, what I am speaking, how I speak, proving it, and then concluding it; or time sequence, where I am referring to the past, relevance in the present, and projections in the future. This is what I speak. So, first I have to brainstorm, then the format of speaking, then actually speak. Now, how do I speak? So, verbally when I am communicating, I should keep in mind certain things as a speaker, so that my listeners are listening attentively. Now, here how to speak is depending on speed. How many words am I speaking per minute? An average human being, we can talk of, speak about 90 to 120 words per minute when we are speaking, given any language that we have got where we are fluent. So, how many words are we speaking, and are the listeners paying attention to all the words that I have spoken? That is one. Second, clarity. How audible I am. Am I speaking in a very passive voice where the listeners are trying it very hard to listen to what is being spoken, or I have a voice which is distorted, or my voice is something where it is very husky and people are not able to actually take it down, very hoarse kind of a voice. So, there the problems would come in terms of listening. So, clarity should be there. Then punctuations, at what places am I proceeding continuously and at what places am I giving pauses? That is very essential when you are speaking. See, you talk about, we as facilitators or teachers, we continuously take classes for 1 hour, 2 hours and all, or in board meetings we happen to see in companies that the managers or the speaker talk continuously. So, when that continuous communication happens, are the listeners attentively listening or not? That all depends upon what kind of punctuations and pauses am I giving. So, where am I stopping, what am I stressing in the entire conversation? That plays a very important role. Then pronunciation. What are the phonetics that I am using? In English, as a child in school, we all learn about how do we pronounce words. So, when the pronunciation is not appropriate, the listener will be confused with what is the word that is being actually used. So, there plays the role of how do you go about pronouncing that particular word. Then familiarity. Is the speaker himself familiar with the word? Sometimes, we end up using some words to impress somebody where we ourselves are not familiar with those words. So, there comes the problem of familiarity. Then fluency, ability to express very easily. That is very essential. That can come only when the speaker is well aware about what he is speaking. So, the fluency comes only when you have understood what you are speaking very well. And then expression, how do you go about expressing? These are all about how to speak. So, in verbal communication, first part is speaking. What to speak, how to speak. Comes the second part, which is listening. Now, in listening, as a person who is simply sitting back and listening, because speaker is taking the burden of talking everything. Now, as a speaker, you only have the burden of listening. So, how do you go about listening? You have two types of listening there: sympathetic, empathetic. Sympathetic listening is one where the speaker is caring about the other person and showing concern, paying close attention to the other person, what is being spoken. Whereas when you say empathetic listening, you talk about the speaker listening very sensitively and also understanding the emotional signals which are given by the speaker, or adopting discrimination, where you are trying to discriminate how the speaker is actually trying to communicate. Empathetic listening you call, where you are actually sensitive even to the emotional signals which are being sent by the speaker of that particular content, whatever is being spoken. So, are you listening sympathetically, where you are actually paying attention to what is being spoken, or are you listening empathetically, where you are paying attention not only to what is spoken verbally, but are also paying attention to emotional signals which are sent by the speaker through listening. These are all a part of verbal communication. Now coming to non-verbal, which is actually 80% of what we communicate. Verbal is only 20% of what humans communicate, whereas non-verbal is much more, where we talk about, process of sending or receiving wordless message through facial expression, through gazes, through postures, through gestures, through tones in the voice, any kind of signals or clues where anything other than word and language. We are not speaking, neither are we using any language, but still we are communicating. We see today we are using so much of social media, we use so many emoticons in order to send a message on WhatsApp or communicate on social media. When we are happy, we send a smiley. When we are sorrowful, we still send a sorrowful smiley. So that way what happens, those are all emotions. So that way the receiver is able to understand non-verbally. We have not spoken any word as such there, but simply through the sign the person is trying to communicate. Now here in non-verbal communication, various categories are there. First category here is para-language. Para-language is something where you talk about, along with speaking. Say for example, when a mother is scolding the child, she wouldn't scold in a very soft tone. She would scold where the pitch is very high, volume is high, articulation, delivery would be very harsh and rough. On the other hand, when you talk about a manager who is praising the employee, the manager's tone will be very subtle, soft and happy. Whereas if the manager is unhappy with the performance of the employee and wants to punish the employee, his tone and pitch will be very harsh, loud, and you would have the entire tonation which could change in that particular thing. So when we are speaking, we either end up laughing, crying, yawning, screaming, coughing. We give pauses like ooh. All these things are all nothing but para language, which is very essential when we speak as such. That is first. Second is physical appearance. It talks a lot when we speak about the speaker who is actually speaking, the confidence the speaker has got, the kind of appearance depicts what the speaker is all about. So you talk about clothing, you talk about hairstyle, the makeup, the jewelry, the tattoo, piercing, glasses, accessories, anything which the speaker is actually having and communicating plays a small role, but still has got a lot of influence on the listener as such. Actually, many societies have got, all these dress codes, and for example, you talk about, doctors, we have a particular dress code, or air hostess, they would have a particular dress code. So you understand, their policemen, for example, you understand that, it is related to law and something very strict and all. So that way you would see that physical appearance communicates something there, how you present yourself. Then activity, how are you presenting? This is very essential, where you have body movement, how are you moving your hands, eyes, all kinds of gestures that you make. How close are you to the other person when you are speaking? Are you touching or making use of touch when you speak? What kind of eye movements are happening, and whether smell plays a role in speaking. Now here let us see all these non-verbal communications which are there. First one is gestures, facial expression, posture, head nodding, orientation. For example, in most of the classes when we ask students, did you understand? They would nod. And then as a teacher, we understand whether the student have understood because of nodding of the head. Posture of the students, when or even the employees in an organization, when the manager is trying to explain something, having to put your hands across, having to put your hands on your cheeks, or having to put it like that, all that communicates something where through the gestures you are trying to explain the meaning to the other person, whether you are interested, not interested, curious, or whether you are bored from that particular talk which is actually happening. So all these are all a part of your body movement, which are actually called as kinesics. Second thing that you have is closeness, that is proxemics, where you talk about, you know, distance which is being there. Now in case of any conversation, we basically maintain distance which is called as a personal space, comfort zone, and a social space. So how much of a distance are we maintaining with the other person? Depending on that, for example, you would have a spouse, a wife and a husband, where they would be speaking very closely, or a mother and a child, they would be very close. That's a personal zone. But an employee in a company, a supervisor and subordinate, you would maintain a social distance between the two, the physical distance which would be there. The distances which are maintained when you talk is called as proxemics, which also plays an important role. For example, if I am talking with my friend, I can actually put hand across her shoulder and then speak, and then we can actually wave hands and go together. But when I am talking to my supervisor, I wouldn't be doing the same thing. So there is some distance which is being maintained, which is called proxemics. Then you talk about holding hand, shaking hand, guiding through hand strokes, and all these are all touch, which plays a very important role in your non-verbal communication. For example, your supervisor pats on your back. That is, he is actually touching and praising you for the good work that is being done by you. So that is called as haptics, touching, or physical contact through holding, stroking, shaking hands. All these will also communicate something. Eye movements, that is also very essential. How long are you staring or looking at a person? What kind of changes are happening in the pupil size of the eye? Is the listener actually looking into your eyes and speaking? Because eyes basically reveal truthfulness of what is being spoken. So that way, eye movement, length, direction of gaze, changes in the pupil size, all that indicate. There is a lot of research which is also being done in marketing when you talk about eye movement. When you see an advertisement, when you see a product, how does your eye roll, what kind of a movement happen, that talks about interest that a consumer has in a product. So eye movement plays a role there. Smell also, though we say, you know, this is not directly which is there, but in non-verbal communication, the kind of perfume that a person is wearing, the kind of deodorants which are being used, flavors which the person likes, or you know, all kinds of aromatic fragrances which can be there around in a room, all that also communicates a lot about it. For example, during COVID, we all have been used to using all sanitizers, where the smell of it, we could understand, you know, the message that the sanitizer was being used. So that way you have, you know, smell also which tells. And most of the complex messages which are there are all communicated through non-verbal communication. So basically, through non-verbal communication, what are we trying to communicate? Feelings, emotions, attitudes of people. We are trying to actually replace and regulate language which we are using. We are not speaking through words, but we are speaking through movements of eyes, movements of our body, posture movements, head nodding, patting at the back, or using our hands, or distances which are there between us, or eye movements which can happen, or using of some you know, fragrances and smell, through which also we communicate. So that way, today's session we have spoken about these two types, where we spoke about verbal communication and non-verbal. But basically we understood what is the meaning of communication, where we said it is nothing but exchange of information between people. It could be in the form of actual information like a message, or it can be emotions, feelings, thoughts, opinions, all these which are being exchanged between people in order to influence the behavior of another person, in order to have an outcome, in order to see to it that there is a change, or you are trying to influence the happening of series of events which are there. And in that entire process, you would have to remember that there will be 8 elements which are there. To begin with, the receiver who sends the message, there is a channel through which it is being sent, there is encoding which is done to the message, the receiver receives and decodes it, and there is whole lot of noise or disturbance which is present. And when we come to verbal and non-verbal communication, we basically see that verbal is all about speaking and listening. then how we speak, what we speak basically comes into picture there. In what we speak, we talk about, you know, brainstorming about all our thoughts. We talk about how we are presenting that particular message and actual presentation there. Then in listening, we talk about whether listeners are listening sympathetically or empathetically. Then we talk about non-verbal communication, where we say all kinds of gestures, body movements, any kind of a thing which is other than words spoken, other than any language which is there. So these two basic ideas are there in verbal and non-verbal communication, where most of all the communication which happens across the world, whether it is in a formal context or whether it is in an informal context, all our communication is based on verbal and non-verbal communication. So this was your lesson 1 in your unit 1 of managerial communication, where we concentrated on verbal and non-verbal communication. Thank you.